How much do you love Jesus? Really, how much do you love Jesus? There's a fascinating story in Luke's Gospel at the end of chapter 7 about a woman who came to Jesus. Now, I think it must have been the night of a Sabbath, and she would have heard Jesus possibly speak in her synagogue that morning, or maybe heard him speak to a crowd of people somewhere else that day. Because that evening, Jesus has been invited to a dinner at a Pharisee's house. Now understand, large houses in that day had a courtyard. The house, you had an entrance, and then you had sections of the house on either side, maybe a kitchen, maybe bedrooms. And then you had a courtyard in the middle. There was a table set up in the courtyard, and that's where the host and the invited guest would sit and eat dinner. And then around the edges, if there was a prestigious guest, people in the community would come in and they'd sit around the edges and listen to the conversation. This woman came to dinner, but it's interesting. It says in verse 37, there was a woman in the city who was a sinner. And when she knew that Jesus was at the dinner at the Pharisee's house, she brought an alabaster flask of fragrant oil. So here's this woman. She's known as a sinner, which probably means she was a prostitute or a very, very immoral woman. She had a reputation, and she would have been scorned and despised by her community. It would have taken a lot of guts, a lot of courage for her to walk into a Pharisee's courtyard, sit down, and listen to a rabbi, Jesus, talk. But she didn't stop there because she loved him so much that she was willing to go to the Pharisees' dinner, but she didn't stop there. She bowed down behind Jesus, and then she began to wash his feet, and then she kissed his feet, and then she wiped his feet with her tears, and she anointed them with this extremely expensive perfume that must have been the gift of one of her clients or boyfriends as an immoral woman. Think about that. And the point Jesus brings out is the fact that the Pharisee is upset about this. He says, "Why are you allowing this sinful woman to touch you?" And he says, "Well, she loves much. And let me tell you why." And he tells a story about a creditor who had two men that owed him money. One owed a small amount of money. One owed a great deal of money. And he forgave both of them their debts. He said, "Who's going to love the creditor the most?" The Pharisee said, "Well, the one that's been forgiven the most." He said, "You're right. The one who's been forgiven will love the most." And Jesus said, "You've judged rightly. Don't you see this woman? I entered your house." Now, it was the custom. You were supposed to give a guest water for their feet. And Jesus said, "You gave me no water for my feet. But she's washed my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss." When a guest came in a Mideastern home, you were supposed to kiss him on the cheek, the host would. But he didn't even kiss Jesus when he came in. And Jesus said, "This woman, it would not be appropriate for her to kiss me on the cheek, but she's been kissing my feet ever since she came in." He said, "You didn't anoint my head with oil." What they would do in that day is put a drop of oil on the guest's head as usually a perfumed oil as a sign of greeting. He says, "But this woman has anointed me with fragrant oil. Therefore I say to you, her sins, which are many," and you're a Pharisee, you're self-righteous, you keep track of everybody else's sins, "they're forgiven." And so she loves a lot. But to whom little is forgiven, you who doesn't think that he needs to be forgiven because you're so self-righteous, you love a little. And he looked at her and he said, "Your sins are forgiven. Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." You see, she loved much because she had been forgiven much. What I want to make clear to you is all of us have been forgiven much. We've broken God's law over and over and over and over again. We failed to love God with all our heart, soul, minds, and strength. We failed to love our neighbors as ourselves. We have failed to stop from worshiping things that aren't God and trying to make gods out of them. We've misused God's name. We've violated the principle of giving Him one day a week. We have lied to people. We've cheated people. We've stolen people. We've lusted after people. We've been angry at people and wished them harm. We've coveted other people's things, their situations, their circumstances. We have all sinned much. Thank God, by the grace of Jesus, we all can be forgiven much. Therefore, we all should love Him much. She was an extravagant, courageous lover because she realized how much she'd been forgiven. If you're not an extravagant, courageous lover of Jesus, you need to realize how much you need to be forgiven.